So I have a hot take that's probably going to piss off a lot of nerds. I think that Arduinos and ESP32s are a lot like Kleenex. Let me explain. Okay, so if you don't know, what we colloquially know as Kleenex aren't actually called Kleenex. These are technically facial tissues or just tissues. And that's because for the longest time, the Kleenex brand pretty much owned the market for tissues. So much so that people just started referring to these as Kleenex and people know what you're talking about even though they're not actual Kleenex. Now, this is where we talk about the Arduino, ESP32, and pretty much every other development-focused microcontroller. So Arduino is a company that pretty much pioneered the DIY microcontroller boards that make it really easy to program things and do all sorts of stuff on. Not only did they actually manufacture the boards to program the things on, but they also have a really easy to use software and a version of their own coding language that you could use to write software onto the boards. These specifically are explicitly called Arduinos. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now this is an ESP32, which is a development board that's very, very similar to Arduino, but it's made by what might as well be a no-name company. There's no like branding behind it. It's just a really cheap, affordable version of it. Now, this technically is not an Arduino. It's not made by Arduino. It doesn't use any Arduino parts. But, and this is where the hot take comes in, I personally think that because of the pathway that Arduino has paved and what people understand it as, I think it's fair enough and not necessarily blanketly incorrect to call these an Arduino. I personally almost always call these Arduinos in my content because one of the biggest focuses of my content is accessibility and making things easy to understand for people. And for all intents and purposes and understanding of where this fits in a project, it is from what people currently understand is an Arduino. And there's even more overlaps than with the Kleenex reference, because this isn't just a different company making something similar. They are doing that, but it does actually run the Arduino software. So you're able to use the Arduino IDE, which is where you write code and upload it to the boards, the actual Arduino branded software, and upload it to these boards. So it is technically a different company's board, but you're still using like an ounce of Arduino. They are on paper totally different. This is not an Arduino, just like these are not Kleenex. But for the sake of understanding and contextualizing in conversations, it makes sense and people understand what you're talking about when you say this is an Arduino. So I'm gonna call it that sometimes. I'm sorry if that pisses you off, but that's the way she goes. Catch you in the next video. Can it play Pedro Raccoon? I don't know. This is what a video looks like decoded into text. 60,000 lines worth. Let's upload the code and see what happens. So I spent pretty much my entire weekend building this. This is the very first prototype of an idea I had the other day of a module desk display widget, and the best part is the parts to build this thing were only like $10. Now, even though this is a very scrappily put together first prototype, I'm really impressed with the functionality I've been able to get out of it as it is, so I'm really looking forward to what it could turn into. Let me show you what it could do, and then I'll go a little bit deeper into the technical side and how I actually built this thing. So the inspiration from this whole thing came from something called a Nixie tube clock, which is a device I've always loved. They use these like physical tubes with elements in them to display numbers. I just absolutely love the look, specifically how each digit is like its own display. But these are like $800, so not a chance. Anyway, a few months ago, I picked up these really cheap little round displays. They're like $2, but I never really had a plan for them until I kind of put the two together and I started building this. So originally, I just built it to be a clock, just to emulate the Nixie tubes. And this was a big learning curve, but I did get it working. And I built it using an ESP32, which is a device that connects to the internet, and I use the internet to update the time in real time. But then I realized I have this really cool looking device and all these colored screens that I could do anything I want with them, so I started thinking about the widgets that I would want on my desk. First widget I built out was this one that just shows the price of a bunch of different stocks, and you can define manually which ones they are. Then I made this other one here that shows like my TikTok followers. It could be YouTube, Instagram, or whatever. I know this isn't pretty, but keep in mind I did the software and hardware while learning how all of this stuff works in like 24 hours. This is just a proof of concept for all of these. And then this last widget, which I really like, is a weather widget. And I've got it here so it's showing like a picture of the city, an icon of the forecast, a little readout of the forecast, and then the temperature. And again, this is all super flexible, just proof of concept, but I think even this looks really, really good. The thing that gets me really excited about this thing is just the amount of flexibility you have with it because it's connected to the internet. Like right now, everything is very, very manual and scrapped together, but you could eventually have it so there's like an app on your phone and you could not only control like the major widgets that are on each screen, but you could like customize each screen within the widget. Maybe you want like a Spotify player on one, the weather on the other, a stock on the other one, and your TikTok followers in the screen. Maybe it shows like your smart home stats. You could literally display anything on these things because it's 100% open source. Like the code is just, I wrote it in Arduino. Which brings me to how I built this thing, and I learned a lot. So it's built with two major parts. These TFT displays, like I said, they're about $2 to $3 a piece on AliExpress. and then an ESP32 chip. These are really common Arduino development boards, and the biggest thing is they have Wi-Fi on them, so you can write code to them and connect to the internet to do all sorts of stuff. Now, I've used these displays before, and they're relatively easy to hook up. You just plug all the right pins into the Arduino, and the code's kind of hard to navigate, but it's doable. Now, the really hard part of this project was learning how to have the Arduino drive multiple of the displays at once, which it's meant to do kind of, but the code is a little bit clunky to do it. So I put them on a breadboard and started messing around with the code, and it took me a while, but I finally figured it out. I'm going to kind of explain it to you here because I find it super interesting. Okay, so each of these displays have 8 wires, and each of those wires has to go to the Arduino. Now, you might be thinking here, 8 wires times 5 displays, that's so many wires, but you'll see here in the project where it's wired up, there's actually not nearly that many, and that's because it uses something really, really smart. Okay, so basically on these boards, 5 of the wires output the video signal, and then there's power and ground, and then there's one more wire. Now, the really weird thing is all of the boards, every single one of these boards gets wired to the same video output. So all of the displays are getting an identical video output at all times. This means that all 5 of the displays are all plugged into the exact same video out. And you might think, what the hell, but they're displaying different images. How is that possible? And this is so cool to me. So there's one extra wire called the chip select wire. And basically what you do is you could tell the display to receive or not receive the signal. So when you want to write something to this display, you tell all the other displays to stop receiving the signal. It blasts all of the video signals down the wire. These ones are saying don't listen, and this one only updates. And you do that for the next display, and you do all that so fast it happens in like fractions of a second. But that's how you have this really light wire management where everything's going to only one pin, and you only need one separate unique cable to manage each of these displays. It was super cool. Anyway, figured all that out on the breadboard. When I got both the displays going, I was ecstatic. This part alone took me like 4 hours to figure out. But now that I had it technically all figured out, I need to figure out how to connect all of these boards together, and I probably did this in the worst way possible, and I just did a bunch of sloppy soldering to wire them all together. This was such a messy process, but believe it or not, it did work, and I only had one little short I had to fix, and then it was kind of just working. After I got them all up and running, I started writing my first basic code, starting with the clock one. This alone took me like 6 hours. I learned so much about Arduino code going down this road. After I wrote that, I printed this really simple 3D printed piece just to hold all of the displays in one bundle. Eventually, the ESP32 and the base will all be built in one little package, but for now, I'm happy with it as it is for prototyping. I'd also eventually like to add like buttons so you could manually switch between the displays, turn it on and off, brightness, all of that. But for now, like I said, prototype. Anyway, that was a lot of talking, but I'm really proud of this thing. I'd love to hear your guys' ideas of anything I might want to develop for it. I'm going to spend the next like week just cleaning up the code and stuff. It's all so messy and bodged together right now, but I want to get it to a point where I can feel confident further developing this and having a platform that I can do that on. Then I'll start focusing on the hardware a little bit more, getting it all buttoned up, maybe looking at building a custom PCB. I'm just so excited. I'd love your guys' feedback. If you have any super specific questions on this, I'll be posting all about it in my Discord. I'll be more than willing to share the code and everything on that. You can find that in my bio. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. That was a really long video. If you're here for the end of it, you're a real one. I will catch you in the next one. Goodbye.